Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi. We're doing a little excursion because we're talking about how God's take on marriage, his criticism of how husbands have been treating their wives. I want to expand that and just kind of go back. We can even say now, from a Jewish perspective, why they would have understood this rebuke, having had the Torah, the first five books of the Bible. Now, there is another side of this, the total depravity part of man, which renders him incapable of doing good. However, God still tells us and commands us. So this is the rebuke. And just so we're clear too, so that when we use the term total depravity, even though man is lost in his sins, it doesn't mean that he cannot ever do good. So in other words, every single person is never just kind of just going to always sin profusely. Which is, by the way, if you didn't have law, yes, okay. If we did not have law, that would be true. But we have the law as a guide. The law is good, but we're slaves to sin. But it certainly holds back how bad could be. All right, so um, so the reason why we have then, especially like with the Jew, the rebuke that God is giving, you've mistreated your wives. Remember, they would have had Genesis. They would have had what we're going to get back into. So let's get back into it. And I'm going to pick this back up in Genesis. Well, here it is. Here it is. Where we left off, he says, verse 14. Yet you ask, for what reason? Because the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth. You have acted treacherously against her, though she was your marriage partner and your wife by covenant. So we've been kind of exploring this a little bit. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 2, and I want to pick up on this to show, okay, right here, we see what God created in marriage. Now, this also answers some questions. This answers some questions about divorce. Okay. Now, when he says right here, we remember we said that God makes a statement. It is not good for man to be alone. This statement is the statement that God himself, he created man to have companion. And then we see a process where God brings man to the realization that the companionship that he needs can't be found in the animal world. So, I mean, we can explore why some people's attachment to their animals. I just recently saw in the news where a person escaped a fire and left their kids in there. I think the kids were eventually rescued. But where people started dragging her in the comments was they saw that she had a picture of she was holding her dog. Okay. Um, but I'm not going to. Let me refrain because I don't want to get too off in it. That's neither here or there to this. The point is that God created for man a companion, and then this companion was a equal partner mentally, emotionally, and physically. Now, I did say last time that you see science and you see kind of atheists that will tell us that all of what we see right here in terms of creation just kind of came from natural processes. And the one thing I oftentimes wonder that that they won't answer it. If you're going to attempt to tell me that just a scientific process that something just naturally formed, why the genitals? Okay, that's just one out of billions of questions we can ask. And I'm saying that in context with here. Why do we need if why did you need hear God's purpose? And this is why I was saying this initially. You can discover God's purpose by just kind of examining, observing creation, right? So that, for example, just from a human standpoint, you don't walk on your hands. So in other words, if you all of a sudden became conscious, okay, just and this is such a hypothetical, okay, but all of a sudden if you became conscious and you didn't know anything, you would discover I don't have to walk on my hands, I got feet, right? You would discover that I don't have to use my mouth to tie something, I got hands, right? So that's an example, and so the logic of creation, which was on purpose, and here we see man can discover. Now I can also get off into a lot of other things in terms of the same sex issue, just from a biological issue. I won't because I'll tell you why I don't engage that argument. I would much rather share Christ, not to condemn from the culture, since the culture itself is just as bad. But anyway, and that issue is more a spiritual issue. People need to come to Christ. Okay, people need to come to Christ. When you have a person that, in their mind, would say, let's same sex. And of course, even in the church world we have today, we do have even Christians that are trying to that are trying to say, right? They're trying to say that um, God made them that way. But okay, but like I say, when you look at here, the writings, right? This is what God tells us. He took Adam through this process of, okay, there's nothing out in the animal world, okay? There's nothing out in the animal world that where you're going to find companion. And so what we see here, okay, that God created a female. Now, so just scientifically, logically. So we're not talking about bringing in the sin nature, because that's what's ruling a lot of times these um, opinions and positions. So we see here what God created for man. First, he says man should not be alone. And so what does he create? He creates a woman. So what is this woman? A woman then has all of the female counterparts to the male, and it fits perfectly. It fits perfectly. Now, just again, once we get into chapter 3, everything changes. So from everything changes from chapter 3 because man is sinful. Okay, man is sinful. But what I wanted you to see here is what God created, male and female. And then he comes down and he says right here in verse 24, this is why man leaves his father and his mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. And that's important to understand what marriage is. Under when God brings the two together, they become one flesh. So it's not just a piece of paper. The consummation, the act of the consummation signifies that. But true marriage in God's sight is one flesh. The bond is one flesh. So now, why is divorce? Why can't you get a divorce? Or why is divorce not permissible? Because how do you break the flesh? Well, the only way that flesh can be broken is through death. Okay? The only way that bond can be broken is through death. Then a man is free to go to marry someone else. Or the wife is free to marry someone else. Okay? So now remember right here, this is in a perfect world. Right? In a perfect world. Which now, as we go into chapter 3, it is no longer a perfect world. All right, so let me read one more verse from the New Testament here where Jesus makes a statement here, where Jesus makes a statement. Mark chapter 10. So here we go. Mark chapter 10. And he set out from there, and he went from the region of Judea and across the Jordan. And then crowds converged on him again. And as he usually did, he began teaching them once more. Some Pharisees approached him to test him. They asked him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Now I want to read this from, again, I do believe one of the gospel accounts. Let me see if this one here. One of the gospel account. Let's see here. No, not what I want. No, that's not what I want. All right. I can't find it, but I think one of the gospel accounts says, can you divorce a wife for any cause? Okay. I'll find that one later. It might be Matthew. Anyway, I have to find that later. So here's the question then. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And then he says, so he replied to them, what did Moses command you? They said, Moses permitted us to write divorce papers and send her away. But Jesus told them, he wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man should leave his father and his mother, and they should be joined and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, man must not separate. Now, so he Jesus comes back and again reinforces then the Genesis account. So now you have to ask the question then, let's go back to what the Pharisees said. Excuse me. Moses permitted us to write divorce papers and to send them away. See if I can find that right quick. No, that's not it. So Jesus captures this perfectly here. You start off with Genesis and the one flesh. He makes Eve, they join together, one flesh. Literally, they were one flesh because Eve was literally taken from his rib. So now the marriage under God's command is you're joined together, one flesh. So now when the law then was enacted, God gave a out clause, as it were. And that one single out clause was that if your husband, if your wife or adultery, right? For adultery's sake, okay? Let's kind of sit down. He says here, verse 10 says, now in the house his disciples questioned him again about this matter, and he said to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Also, she divorces. If she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. So, I'll get to that in a moment because I'm not going to go too deep into this because here's the point. What the Pharisees replied or answered Jesus about when they asked this question, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Well, they said, well, yeah, you can divorce your wife. They said, well, just, write some paper up. That's what the law says. Now, what is kind of not being talked about here is, well, what was the single exception to the marriage rule? In other words, why was divorce permitted? The single reason that divorce was permitted, and it was only adultery, and that's important to understand. It was only the adultery, and that's a far cry from what you see today. That why people are divorcing. Some of it is adultery, but in reality, a lot of it is just irreconcilable distance, right? Differences. We're not getting along or whatever. Okay. I remember one particular pastor who his wife passed away, and about 6 months later he married, and I think he did that against all counsel. But he married, and then he was divorced. I mean, literally, we can go on and on and on with that, and then people sometimes then invent reasons why they are justifications for their marriage, and the only justification you can have under the Old Testament law is adultery. That's it. But I do have a better way, okay, which we'll get into in the next study. But notice and then he says that the only reason, acceptable reason, was adultery. Okay, the only reason. All right, so we'll pick this up in the next study, obviously, and we're going to continue on. Like I said, I'm going to explore this just a little bit, and as you can see, I'm kind of resistant about really doing a deep dive into this, but I think we have enough to kind of get the picture. We have enough to get the picture, and why even in Malachi, why God is rebuking the husband, okay, which is again interesting. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.